Let's talk about this as we're talking about fraternities. You and I did this morning on Off the Grid on Fox and Friends. Really interesting and cool scene out of North Carolina. So the college campus protests, Pete, are really metastasizing. I mean, they're growing, and they are at more and more college campuses across the country. They made their way to the University of North Carolina. And the story goes that a group of frat guys were walking across campus and saw that the American flag had been replaced by the Palestinian flag. That in and of itself, notable and disgusting.
Yeah.
Well, they, I guess, made enough noise that campus administration came out along with campus security and replaced the American flag. And at that point now, they all break out into the national anthem, singing the national anthem. But when campus security leaves, the protesters try to take back down the American flag. Also, by the way, that part of this story, worthy of analysis. But the frat bros protected the flag for the better part of an hour while being pelted by water bottles and, rocks and various projectiles. And I think we just learned, frat bros, the savior of UNC, the savior of America.
It's true. Well, exactly the kind of guys that Bud Light didn't want. This is the demographic of people that is supposed to sit in the corner and be quiet and not be counted. Certainly way too much privilege, especially when you think about it. Where's the concentric circles of white privilege? It might be a frat boy at UNC, might be right around the center of that. Except what they are, they're just probably good kids who have good parents who love the country and haven't been brainwashed. And they represent, as we said this morning, I'm sure they represent the vast majority of kids at UNC, the vast majority of people in North Carolina. There's a moment where you say, that's it, I'm fed up. I saw it this morning too. I don't know if you saw the press conference with Eric Adams with the police department, but the mayor of New York today gave one of the most eloquent defenses of the American flag I've heard in a long time. He's like, we put the American flag back up in Columbia because this is America. And my uncle died for that flag. And we love this country. We're at a place where if you can't defend this, if you can't go to your campus administrators and say, in America, pull that garbage flag down and put our flag up, then we really have lost everything. So these frat boys, I think you're right to seize on it. They took what could have been an easy moment to fold and say, hey, this is just kind of how it is, or might not. And they said, this is it. We're not taking it. And the administrators don't care enough, but we do, so we're going to stay. And I think it takes that type of guts every once in a while just to remind these intersectional, whatever pro-Palestinian Hamas lovers that you don't represent what most people think, and you're crazy, and you're extreme, and you're not welcome. Certainly at the University of North Carolina to raise that flag. And I think that's a great thing.
I said it's worthy of its own analysis that they took down the American flag. I mean, I don't want to be guilty of saying the obvious because I think that, certainly you and Rachel and I went together. We do understand the obvious point that needs to be made. So, which is this, Pete. I was at breakfast this morning. This is what I do. I like to go to breakfast with my buddies. It's my big social outing. It's what I am left with in life now, breakfast with my friends. And we were talking about this. One of my friends, there's 5 or 6 of us, and one of my friends is Jewish, and he's obviously very passionate about this issue of what's happening. His daughter goes to the University of Texas, and you saw this past weekend on Fox and Friends, I put up a picture he sent me of pretty close to, if not obvious, anti-Semitic signs on campus in Austin. And we were breaking down, who are these protesters, right? And what are they protesting? And I told my friend, the only trouble I have in matching your passion, because you clearly see the anti-Semitism and you focus on the anti-Semitism. And I think that's part of the pie. But I don't think it's the majority of the pie. And he doesn't agree with me. He disagrees with me. And I said, look, I don't think your average lefty college student is masking some deep anti-Semitism. I think there is deep anti-Semitism in many elements of society, but I don't think that makes up 60% of what we're seeing at Columbia. I don't think that makes up, I don't even think it makes up probably 30% what we're seeing at UT Austin or North Carolina. I think there's so many layers to this, right? And you and I broke it down off the wall. There is the organized effort. There's the Student Justice for Palestine, which has money and organization behind it. I think a lot of these kids don't even go to school, by the way. I don't think they're students at Columbia. They're not students at these colleges. So that's another level and element. The big element, and then there's the anti-Semitic element. And the big element, which you and I have discussed, is and I don't mean to be dismissive, but like, I'm going to use the word ignorant instead of dumb, because dumb implies you have a lack of IQ. Ignorant implies you have a lack of education. And that's what we're talking about. Like, I think the vast majority of the average student that joins this stuff is looking for purpose and meaning. He or she is pretty empty in life. They want to have something to attach themselves to that's greater than themselves. And they've been indoctrinated in an education system for 50 years. I know they're not 50 years old. I'm saying this has been a half a century in the making, where ignorance is allowed to fester because enlightenment is seen as, I'm a champion of the oppressed. I am against the oppressor. And it's critical theory. It's a thing. It exists. It's the core of education. And they're taught not to be critical thinkers, but activists. And I think that's what's happening on most of these campuses. And so when I look at the makeup of this, we all go, who are they and what are they for? I think 50 or 60% is the failure of education and the failure of society to provide purpose to kids who are looking for something deeper in life. And by the way, one of my friends, Pete, said, hey, the problem on a superficial level is Jews are white. You know, like that's the issue. And they are very shallow about, well, whites are oppressors, right? And Palestinians have darker skin, so they're the oppressed. And one of my friends was like, well, if and I know that there are very different ethnicities even within Judaism, but you know, like if Jews were seen as the racial minority, and they are literally the racial minority, but if they were seen as the racial minority, these college kids wouldn't be protesting against them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's excellent analysis. I think you're right. These are ultimately anti-Christian, anti-Western protests at their core. I know that sounds odd, but anti-Western civilization. And it is the nexus of Christianity and Judaism, their connection, which I think, and then the historic tropes of Jews being the center of power and control are an easy thing for them to latch onto in a life where they're disaffected and disillusioned by their lot in life. It's their religion. I mean, you hear the church bells. Like kids like that used to be raised on hymns and given context and given their view of the world and understanding of the world. And now this is their new church. This is their new passion. It's where they find their purpose. You're exactly right. But I also don't think you can underestimate the percentage of Muslim students that are in these groups that have been trained up in Middle Eastern studies institutes and elsewhere to have a pretty extreme view of their own country, of the West, of the state of Israel. I mean, you don't accidentally fly a Hezbollah flag. You don't accidentally fly a Hamas flag. Even the chance that you make, yes, there's a lot of ignorance in that group. There's no doubt about it. But at some level, you have to know it means the death of people, the death of a group of people, which you're chanting for. And so I do think there's this unholy nexus between Islamists and leftists, which we talk about all the time. And I don't know what the exact percentage is. And I bet it's different in a lot of different places. In Colombia, you probably have a higher percentage of straight up anti-Semitic viewpoints there because, well, the history of the Middle East is taught quite differently at Colombia than it is in a lot of other places. So it's and left unchecked, these slogans devolve into what is. I think your friend is right. Like, it's not that everything is about anti-Semitism. It's that anti-Semitism becomes kind of the canary in the coal mine. It's sort of the quickest place to identify if someone understands the West or if someone hates the West. And if they really hate the West, a lot of people decide that Israel is the tip of the spear of that hatred, and therefore anti-Semitism comes out of it.
So, okay, and I want to say this, like, and you and I have had discussions and some disagreement on, like, the long-term relationship and the complicated relationship between Israel and the Middle East. And so what I'm saying is that I understand there is a deeper debate to be had. I just don't think these college kids understand it. I don't think they actually. I don't think. And again, I'm not professing stupidity. I'm professing. ignorance. And you see the videos.
They slot them, like you said.
They don't know anything about Gaza.
On the ladder, on the matrix. Where are we? They're bad. I'm good. This is
right.
Where they go. You're exactly right about that.
And I like how you called this an unholy alliance of whatever the Muslim studies wing of these colleges and the left, because, and this takes me back to the obvious point I was alluding to earlier. There's nothing that fits between the values of the American left and Islam. Nothing fits. And that's stating the obvious. The only tie that binds those two groups together, to your point, Pete, is a hatred of the West. And this takes us back to the American flag. So to me, that should be a really, it's such a symbolic moment that we're replacing the American flag, or we're destroying the American flag, or we're attacking the American flag, that tells you a lot about the core of these protests.
Absolutely right. I mean, the Red-Green Alliance is what it's been called, is not a new thing. It's the Marxists and green being the symbol of Islamists are happy to work together to coexist, to defeat us, and then they'll turn on each other if and when that day comes where their success is complete. But they only share a hate for Christians and for the West and for America. That is what they share. That's what they know to be true. Otherwise, if you put them in a room for 10 minutes and have them discuss their actual worldviews, they wouldn't agree on anything, because one is a fundamentally patriarchal, traditional view of the world in Islamism, and another one has overturned the entire view, rejects the family completely, and wants the state to control everything. I mean, one is the state, the other rejects. I mean, they're antithetical worldviews united by only one thing. And at this point, because we have been so prosperous and so powerful for so long, you're seeing an even more ramped up attempt to lean into the fractures that have been self-inflicted, as you pointed out, for 50, 60, 70 years. They see the advantage now. We can't defend ourselves. And our last line of defense, to bring it all, our frat boys at North Carolina that are like, no, at least the flag stays, And so it's heartening to see that there's these folks are not the majority, but that's not who destroys countries. It's noisy, insistent, pesky, just vigilant minority that cudgels the rest of us into the corner. And it's a good story to see.
So that's going to be my last point. You teed me up perfectly for my last point on this UNC story. First of all, I think this detail is important, and I get your point. You're like, if you were looking at the concentric circles, the bullseye of the dartboard on white privilege would be a bunch of frat guys from UNC. But the guy that made this well known, at least on Twitter, his name's Guillermo Estrada. And his parents were immigrants to the United States, and he was raised in a military family. And yeah, he's in a frat at UNC, and he's part of the group of guys that protected the American flag. And I mean, so throw your stereotypes aside. I think you're exactly right, by the way, that they represent the majority. I think you're right, and we could take heart from that. But beyond taking heart, the lesson that we should take, I said this morning to you, is patriotism is probably more common than we appreciate, but bravery is probably more rare than we appreciate. And what these boys did was not just patriotic, but it was brave to do that, to stand up to that crowd, to risk unpopularity, probably to risk the ire of the administration of the college. It was patriotic, but more importantly, it was brave.
I love that. I love that. You know what? Because bravery, I think of the guys I went to college with, good guys. They're brave guys, I would think, but joining the military isn't the only reflection of bravery. I guess what I'm getting at is these days are going to require all of us in whatever realm of life we're in to be strong and courageous. Like, listen to Joshua and follow that lead in whatever arena you're in, because they're counting on the cowardice and the almost dismissiveness. Like the other instinct could have been these frat boys saying, "Oh man, idiots. Nobody listens to them." Walk
it's
through
easy to do nothing.
That's easy to do nothing always. So in that sense, like I said, it's really encouraging. And it's the instinct of men to want to stand up and be strong. There's not a lot of instances where that's being portrayed or modeled properly in our society. It's a whole nother deal. But it's good.